What if Prince Harry tried to reunite with his family at Prince Philip's funeral, but Meghan Markle stopped him? Newly leaked palace documents expose a heartbreaking twist, private notes written by Prince Harry to his father, King Charles, pleading for a chance to reconnect during the late Duke of Edinburgh's funeral. But those messages were never delivered. Why? A palace insider says Meghan intercepted them. Tonight, we unpack the hidden drafts, digital traces, and a whistleblower's testimony that could rewrite the royal family's most painful chapter. Was this a missed farewell or a calculated silence? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The silence was deafening, as the world tuned in to witness the solemn ceremony at St. George's Chapel, Windsor, where the late Prince Philip was laid to rest. Every camera angle seemed to echo the same unsettling truth. Prince Harry walked alone. Not merely in step, but in spirit. His eyes were fixed, his posture rigid, and the royal family he once called home surrounded him like strangers at a public event. No hugs, no side glances, no whispered words of consolation. Something wasn't right. And now, we may know why. What if everything we witnessed that day, the cold shoulders, the visible divide, the emotional restraint, was not just the product of past tensions, but the result of something far more deliberate? A coordinated obstruction, not from the palace, but from inside Harry's own home? A newly leaked palace file, hidden from public view until now, may contain the most damning revelation yet. Private notes, reportedly authored by Prince Harry and addressed directly to his father, King Charles, have surfaced through an anonymous royal staffer's encrypted transmission. And within them lies a shocking confession. According to these secret messages, Prince Harry tried to contact his family ahead of Prince Philip's funeral. He tried, but the messages never made it. The calls were blocked. The emails were intercepted. The route back into his family's embrace was, in his own words, cut off at the gate. And who allegedly stood guard at that gate? Meghan Markle. For months, speculation has swirled around the fractured relationship between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family. From the bombshell Oprah interview to the Netflix documentaries, every move has deepened the rift. But now, the focus shifts from public perception to private interference. This isn't about media narratives or tabloid speculation. This is about an internal breach. About the possibility that a grieving son was deliberately kept from connecting with his father and brother in one of the royal family's most vulnerable moments. The funeral of Prince Philip was supposed to be a sacred pause, a temporary ceasefire amid royal chaos, a moment to honor a patriarch whose legacy bridged generations. Yet, instead of unity, the ceremony was defined by dissonance. And as the cameras lingered on Prince Harry, walking behind the coffin of his grandfather, the world couldn't help but notice the deep sense of alienation in his eyes. Now, we may finally understand why. The leaked notes, if proven authentic, are a devastating window into Harry's state of mind. In one passage, he allegedly pleads with his father, saying, "I tried to reach you. I was told it would make things worse." Another extract reads, "I wanted to be there not just physically, but emotionally, but I was advised to remain neutral. That wasn't my call." The implication? That someone else was orchestrating his silence. Someone who feared what he might say. Or worse, feared what he might hear in return. For those who have followed the ongoing saga of Harry and Meghan's departure from royal life, this development isn't just a twist, it's an emotional unraveling. It reframes everything. The images of the funeral, once interpreted as the cold aftermath of Megxit, now appear as symptoms of a deeper manipulation, one that allegedly prevented a son from reconciling with his father and brother before grief permanently cemented their emotional distance. What makes this revelation even more haunting is the timing. These notes weren't written months after the funeral and reflection. They were reportedly drafted during the very week Prince Philip passed. Written late at night, sometimes after Zoom meetings, sometimes after long silences in the Sussex home. These weren't rehearsed statements for the press. They were raw, vulnerable, unfiltered cries for connection. And they were never delivered. Why? That's the question echoing across royal circles and social media alike. Why would Meghan prevent her husband from reaching out to his family at such a critical time? Was it out of loyalty? Protection? Control? Or was there something else at play? Something rooted in fear of reconciliation? To understand the depth of this betrayal, one must consider what was lost in that moment. Funerals are not just about honoring the dead. They are about stitching the fabric of the living. For Harry, that day may have been his last chance to look his father in the eye as simply a son, Not a prince, not a runaway duke, not a media figure, but a son grieving a shared loss. That moment never came. And yet, to the public, it all seemed calculated. Harry walked behind the coffin, but kept his gaze low. He spoke little, if at all, to William. There was a brief, staged moment of unity after the service, but even that appeared awkward and rehearsed. What we didn't see were the attempts Harry allegedly made behind the scenes. Desperate phone calls, messages sent through intermediaries, and a final handwritten note sealed and left unsent. In many ways, these notes are more than just admissions. They are emotional time bombs. Written from a place of helplessness, they reveal a man caught between his role and his reality. Between the duty he walked away from and the family he couldn't walk back to. And now, these secrets are spilling out. The whistleblower, an unnamed digital records coordinator formerly employed at Clarence House, claims the palace has been aware of these notes for over a year. They were buried, locked behind encrypted drives, never meant to see the light of day. Only after a recent internal review triggered by Charles's coronation staff reshuffling did the contents allegedly reemerge. The staffer, fearing the messages would be destroyed, copied them and quietly leaked them to 2 journalists and a documentary producer. What follows in this story is the result of that act of conscience or treason, depending on whom you ask. But make no mistake, this is not just about family drama. It is a story of control, secrecy, manipulation, and what happens when grief becomes a battleground. It is a story that challenges everything we thought we knew about Harry's role at the funeral. And it is a story that will likely provoke outrage, confusion, and soul-searching among royalists and Republicans alike. The question is no longer, why was Harry so distant that day? The question is, what was he being kept from saying? The weight of royal expectation, grief, loyalty, and personal freedom collided in Windsor that day. But in the shadows, far from the cameras, a quieter tragedy was unfolding. A man reaching for his father's hand and finding it just out of reach. If you thought the royal rift ended with Megxit, think again. What we're about to uncover in the next chapters of this report will reshape how you view the royal family, Meghan Markle, and Prince Harry's place between them. The air was still that morning. Cold, not just in temperature, but in tone. April 17, 2021. Windsor Castle stood stoic and silent under an overcast sky, its towering gray stones casting long shadows across the courtyard. Inside St. George's Chapel, members of the British royal family gathered to pay their final respects to Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, a man whose presence had anchored the monarchy for over 7 decades. But while the cameras fixated on the solemn pageantry of a royal funeral, the real story unfolded in the silence between glances, in the body language of princes who once laughed as brothers, now reduced to distant figures walking in step behind a coffin. Among them, Prince Harry stood out, not because of his uniform, which he was no longer permitted to wear, but because of the invisible wall surrounding him. He wasn't greeted with a smile. He wasn't embraced. Not a single family member walked beside him as he entered the chapel. Even the seating arrangement seemed calculated, with Harry positioned several places apart from Prince William and their father, then still Prince Charles. It wasn't subtle. It was a message, one that reverberated louder than any eulogy spoken that day. The world watched, puzzled. Yes, there had been tension since the Sussexes had stepped down as senior royals. Yes, the Oprah interview had aired just weeks prior, igniting global headlines with allegations of racism, abandonment, and cruelty within the palace walls. But this was a funeral, a moment of shared mourning. If there were ever a time to lay grievances aside, surely this was it. And yet, no such reconciliation took place. The walk behind the coffin, once famously done by William and Harry at their mother's funeral, was noticeably more strained. The symmetry was there in form, but the emotional connection was gone. Their shoulders did not turn toward one another. No small talk passed between them, not even a nod. At one point, Harry's eyes flickered toward William, but his brother's gaze remained fixed forward, unreadable, like a man keeping his armor in place. And King Charles? He kept a quiet, dignified composure, stoic. Yes, but also detached. It felt less like a family mourning their patriarch and more like a public performance, one rehearsed, and rehearsed again, stripped of warmth and cracked under the weight of unspoken betrayal. There were no public tears, no lingering hand on Harry's shoulder, no private moment captured where father and son could be seen grieving together. The entire event had the feeling of a formal ritual rather than an emotional goodbye. And in the eyes of the public, The chill between them became one of the biggest takeaways. What the cameras didn't catch, however, was the build-up to that tension. In the days leading up to the funeral, royal aides scrambled to coordinate protocols. COVID restrictions still loomed large, limiting attendance to just 30 family members. Every move was timed, every seat planned. But even in such a restricted environment, space could have been made for personal gestures. William could have stood beside Harry during the procession. Charles could have privately greeted his son as he arrived. None of that happened. Palace insiders later revealed that meetings were held specifically to discuss optics and minimizing risk. Risk of what? An outburst? A confrontation? Or, as one unnamed aide would later suggest in a leaked memo, the risk that Harry might attempt a private appeal during an inappropriate time. That single line hinted at something deeper. That even before the funeral, the family believed, or had been led to believe, that Prince Harry had no genuine interest in reconciliation. But was that true? A conflicting narrative would soon emerge from a former royal security official who, under condition of anonymity, described a different side of the story. According to him, Harry had made multiple efforts to request brief private meetings with both his father and brother during the trip back to the UK. He didn't want to make a scene, the official explained. He just wanted a moment, 5 minutes. But it was always, not today, or, we'll see after the service. The meetings never happened. At the time, the public didn't know this. All they saw was a man returning to royal grounds for the first time in over a year, wearing a civilian suit instead of a military uniform, walking with his hands clenched and jaw tight. What they didn't see was the silence that had preceded that moment. No phone calls returned. No text messages acknowledged. And, as would later be revealed, no confirmation from his family that he was even welcome. Behind the scenes, staffers debated whether Harry's presence would overshadow the funeral itself. The Sun ran headlines questioning whether Meghan had deliberately stayed behind to avoid confrontation. The palace issued no official comment, choosing instead to let tradition speak louder than any statement. And so, the funeral became a theater of restraint. Even after the service, the moments that could have offered connection fell flat. After the coffin was lowered and the family exited the chapel, cameras captured William, Kate, and Harry walking together briefly, but the atmosphere was painfully awkward. Kate made light conversation. William remained cool. Harry, noticeably uncomfortable, kept his hands in his coat pockets, eyes occasionally darting around, like someone who didn't know whether to speak or stay silent. Royal watchers noted how out of place he seemed, not just geographically, but emotionally. He had returned to his roots, yet looked like a foreigner in his own family. That day didn't just mark the end of a royal era with Philip's passing. It marked the beginning of a realization for many. The fracture in the royal family was not a surface crack. It was a deep, growing chasm. There were no joint statements, no group photos, no off-camera moments of reconciliation that emerged in the press. Just days later, Harry was back on a plane to California, having barely spent 72 hours in the UK. In the following weeks, sources from both sides tried to spin the narrative. Palace insiders insisted that Harry had remained distant, preferring to stay isolated in his Frogmore Cottage quarantine. Sussex allies countered that Harry had hoped for a private talk, but was rebuffed at every turn. Still, with no confirmed proof, the truth remained buried. That is, until the leak. The leaked notes, according to the whistleblower, date back to the exact week of the funeral. One of them, time-stamped April 14th, 3 days before the service, reads, "I've been told not to reach out further, that it would only complicate things. But I need you to know, I tried. I really did." This one note, simple as it is, reframes the entire dynamic of the funeral. What if Harry wasn't silent because he wanted to be? What if he was kept silent? And what if the family's coldness wasn't deliberate cruelty, but misinformed retaliation? These are the questions that now haunt that day. What had once been seen as a symbolic moment, brothers walking side by side behind their grandfather's coffin, now looks like a tragic missed opportunity. An opportunity for healing, for reconnection, for honesty. But those doors were shut, whether by misunderstanding, resentment, or, as the notes suggest, external interference. The result was the same. A moment that could have brought the family closer together only pushed them further apart. And Prince Harry, at the center of it all, left Windsor not with closure, but with deeper wounds than when he had arrived. Royal funerals, particularly at Windsor, are not only moments of mourning, they are choreographed performances, executed down to the minute. Every glance, every step, every seat has a purpose, a message. For centuries, the British royal family has used such solemn occasions not just to honor their dead, but to signal unity, strength, and continuity to a watching world. So when Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, passed away at the age of 99, expectations were not only high, they were rigidly defined. In the House of Windsor, nothing is left to improvisation. Tradition takes precedence, especially in moments of vulnerability. Prince Philip had long made it clear he wished for a low-key, military-style funeral with minimal fuss. And yet, for all the simplicity requested, the event was still an international broadcast seen by millions. It became, by necessity, a performance as much as a farewell. Protocol dictated that family members arrive in a specific order. Clothing had been debated for days, especially surrounding Harry and Prince Andrew, both of whom had stepped away from public duties. The Queen ultimately decided that no senior royal would wear military dress to avoid unnecessary spotlight or embarrassment, a rare deviation from tradition meant to maintain dignity over drama. But beyond dress code and order of procession, there was an unspoken rule, perhaps the most important of all. That family would appear united, at least for the cameras. No matter what rift existed beneath the surface, the family would walk, grieve, and stand together as one. It was the least Prince Philip's legacy deserved, and it was what the world expected to see. This idea of unity was especially focused on Prince William and Prince Harry. Ever since they were young boys walking behind their mother's coffin in 1997, their bond had represented the future of the monarchy. They were modern, human, emotionally available in a way their elders never were. The public grew up with them. So when the royal family began to fracture following Harry and Meghan's departure, and later, the bombshell Oprah interview, the funeral offered the perfect chance to send a message that despite internal struggles, the family could rise above personal conflict in the name of shared heritage. That moment, according to insiders, was what the Queen had hoped for. Not reconciliation in private, not a permanent fix, but at least a public image of solidarity that could begin to thaw the ice. Arrangements were made to seat William and Harry near each other, though not directly side by side. Kate Middleton was positioned carefully between them after the service, to offer some semblance of a bridge, emotional or otherwise. Private time had reportedly been scheduled for the brothers to share a moment before or after the service. But then, something shifted. By the time Harry arrived in the UK, staying at Frogmore Cottage under required COVID protocols, palace aides began signaling that no personal meetings were confirmed. Charles, busy with arrangements and overwhelmed with grief, was reportedly unwilling to open the door to emotional confrontation in the days before his father's funeral. William, according to one source, had nothing to say until the funeral was behind them. Plans to stage a walk or conversation between the brothers after the service were reconsidered. No one wanted a repeat of the drama that had enveloped the monarchy since the Oprah interview aired weeks earlier. Still, none of this meant complete silence. By traditional standards, even the most strained royal relationships follow basic courtesies in times of death. A call, a note, a moment of shared remembrance, especially between father and son, especially at a time like this. What was supposed to happen, according to insiders familiar with standard royal protocol, was that Harry would have been welcomed in a short private audience with Charles, not as Duke of Sussex, but as Philip's grandson. These meetings often happen quietly, away from public view, before any major ceremony. They're brief, rarely documented, but incredibly symbolic. That meeting never occurred. Protocol also encouraged an unspoken rule among siblings during such funerals, a moment to walk or stand together. Regardless of tensions, the public-facing side of royal duty always prioritized grace. Diana's funeral had imprinted that on both brothers in their youth. Yet, at Philip's, they were visibly separated during the march and maintained emotional distance throughout. Royal family observers noticed this deviation instantly. It wasn't just that Harry looked alone, it was that the mechanisms designed to support unity had visibly failed. Veteran royal correspondents pointed out that even in moments where proximity might have allowed for shared grief, such as when the family stood in silence after the service, Harry remained untouched, unacknowledged. And that was not how it was supposed to happen. Behind the scenes, several royal advisors reportedly began asking difficult questions after the funeral. Why didn't Harry engage more with his father or brother? Did he decline private talks? Or was he discouraged from even trying? Some suspected it was a protective measure from the palace, an effort to limit the emotional fallout in an already high-pressure moment. Others, more quietly, wondered if Harry himself had been the one pulling away. But now, with the emergence of Harry's secret notes to Charles, another possibility takes shape. One that challenges every assumption. If the contents of those messages are to be believed, Harry made multiple attempts to contact his father prior to the funeral. He sent digital notes. He tried reaching out through aides. He even considered recording a video message to avoid misinterpretation. In the notes, he writes, "I know you're grieving. I know timing is poor, but I need to speak with you, not as the Duke, not as the runaway son, but as someone who just lost his grandfather." That single line exposes a haunting truth. Harry wasn't rejecting royal protocol. He was, by his own account, trying to follow it. But his efforts weren't met with resistance from the institution. They were, allegedly, intercepted before they even reached the intended recipients. The notes suggest that Harry was advised by a senior household member to hold off on further communication, with the explanation that it could escalate tension. The language was neutral but clear. No messages, no calls, no unscheduled appearances. Wait until after the funeral, he was told. But who made that call? And why? This is where the leak becomes more than just a revelation of private messages. It points to a systemic failure in royal protocol, one not of miscommunication, but of obstruction. When the mechanisms designed to ensure family unity are hijacked by personal or political interests, the entire structure collapses. And in this case, it seems that someone in Harry's inner circle, perhaps even within his own home, took steps to limit his access to his own family. This isn't how royal funerals are meant to unfold. The firm, as insiders refer to the palace apparatus, relies on precision and stability. Even in grief, there is order. But what transpired during Prince Philip's funeral was chaos hidden under a mask of tradition. The public saw discipline, composure, and formality. What they didn't see were the doors that remained closed, the conversations that were never had, and the protocols quietly ignored when they were needed most. Imagine, for a moment, being in Harry's shoes. You've flown thousands of miles to say goodbye to the only grandfather you truly knew. You are back on the soil of your birthright, facing the family you once adored and now feel estranged from. You reach out not once, not twice, but several times, asking for a moment. And every effort is rerouted, dismissed, or denied. Now imagine those denials didn't come from your father or your brother, but from someone much closer, someone you live with, someone who might believe they are protecting you from pain, or perhaps protecting themselves from losing control. In that context, the silence at Windsor becomes something else entirely. Not passive, not indifferent, but orchestrated. The palace had the structure in place. The family had the rituals prepared. The world had the cameras rolling. But the reunion that was meant to unfold never did, because it was sabotaged before it had the chance to begin. The first hints of something deeper, something orchestrated, came not from the tabloids or public speculation, but from inside the palace itself. Not in a press release, not through a leak to a media-friendly outlet, but through an anonymous tip sent to an independent journalist specializing in royal affairs, encrypted, unsigned, and accompanied by a short, simple subject line. You're looking in the wrong direction. The journalist, known for a history of breaking stories about palace inner workings, almost dismissed the message. The inbox was flooded daily with outlandish claims, most of them attention-seeking fabrications. But this one was different. It didn't offer a conspiracy. It didn't rant. It didn't speculate. It simply offered a file, a highly compressed bundle containing message logs, transcripts, and one chilling internal memo from Clarence House. The sender identified themselves only as a former digital records coordinator, employed under contract during the transitional period from Prince Charles's time as Prince of Wales to his early months as monarch. The staffer claimed to have stumbled upon a folder while clearing legacy data systems after the Queen's passing. Buried in a series of encrypted archives, likely copied and preserved out of caution or oversight, were documents labeled internal, unsent correspondence, family. At first glance, the content was sparse. Digital fragments, unsent emails, drafted messages, archived phone logs. But what they revealed was staggering. Multiple attempts by Prince Harry to contact his father, King Charles, in the week leading up to Prince Philip's funeral. And each of those attempts appeared to have been intercepted or ignored, not by Charles himself, but by individuals close to Harry, based in California. The staffer, careful to remove any identifying metadata, claimed they had debated for over a year about whether to go public. They feared losing their reputation, or worse, being prosecuted under official secrecy laws. But what finally pushed them to act was the coronation. The idea that the country would unite under this image of family stability, of dignified leadership. While this truth was buried under layers of silence was more than I could handle, the message read. Harry tried. He didn't walk away without knocking. He wasn't received. And it wasn't just institutional dysfunction. It was personal. One of the most damning pieces was a transcript of a message draft dated April 14, 2021, 3 days before the funeral. Addressed to Pa, Harry's tone is careful but desperate. He writes, I've reached out to William. Haven't heard anything? I understand the mood. I'm not looking to fix it all now. I just want to talk. I'll stay outside if I need to. I'll take a walk with you after. I'm not here to provoke. I just don't want this to pass without hearing your voice. But the message was never sent. Instead, it was saved as a draft, edited once more 2 hours later, and then overwritten entirely. This would be curious on its own. But the whistleblower attached a second document, a routing log showing that the email had been composed on a shared Sussex household device, logged in under Harry's credentials, but with 2 separate access sessions noted that day. One matching Harry's known location. The other, according to the digital ID, was Meghan Markle's. The implications were immediate. If true, this meant Meghan had access to, and possibly edited or deleted, Harry's private notes to his family. A second transcript showed another message from Harry, this one directed to a private aide within Clarence's house. The message, again unsent, reads, I'd like to request a 10-minute call with my father before Saturday. I know it's a lot to ask. I just need to say a few things that should have been said a long time ago. Please advise if there's a window. The staffer's memo adds a chilling footnote, deleted from the device before being queued. User logs indicate intervention from secondary profile. In simpler terms, Harry composed the message. Someone else stopped it. This wasn't speculation. These were digital footprints. Metadata, login sessions, timestamps. Enough, if verified, to confirm not only that Harry tried to reach his family, but that someone in his home deliberately prevented those messages from ever being seen. The journalist who received the leak didn't publish immediately. Instead, they reached out to 2 separate cyber forensic analysts to verify the material. Both concluded that the files were consistent with internal communications software previously reported to be used by royal households. More importantly, the timestamps aligned exactly with Harry's known travel dates and security logs. No evidence of fabrication was found. It was then that the journalist quietly passed the documents to a documentary producer working on a behind-the-scenes special about the royal family's response to Prince Philip's death. What followed was a months-long process of corroboration. And one by one, more confirmations came in. A second anonymous source, an assistant to a communications director at Clarence's house, claimed to have seen a flagged entry in the digital queue around the same time, a request from a foreign link device that was rejected due to protocol freeze. This source believed the request originated from Harry but had been flagged as inadvisable by a third-party liaison. That same liaison had ties to Meghan's Los Angeles PR firm. While the evidence is not courtroom-level definitive, the alignment of documents, device logs, and first-hand staffer observations points to a deeply unsettling picture. Not one of accidental miscommunication, but of deliberate redirection. Why would anyone block Harry from speaking to his father before the funeral? That's the question the whistleblower themselves posed. In their final message, the staffer included a longer statement, detailing the moment they realized what they had uncovered. There's a lot of dysfunction within the palace. Layers of advisors, bureaucracy, misplaced loyalty. But this wasn't red tape. This was intention. Harry may never know that his father never received his messages. Charles may still believe Harry didn't try. And that gap, between what they believed and what actually happened, was the death blow. It froze everything. What makes the whistleblower's account even more damning is their claim that palace leadership eventually became aware of the blocked messages, but chose not to address it publicly. Internal damage control began once coronation preparations ramped up, with communications teams quietly clearing legacy files and digital correspondence. It was during this cleanup that the staffer found the unsent drafts, stored not on royal servers, but in a backup sync to a personal device associated with the Sussexes. That detail alone raises further questions about data sharing and access within the royal households. Why were such sensitive drafts left stored on personal systems? Why weren't they deleted immediately? Who else saw them? And, most critically, what does Meghan Markle know about these messages? Supporters of Meghan argue that she has always protected her husband from the harsh glare of royal judgment, that she saw how the firm operated and believed shielding Harry was the only way to preserve their sanity. But critics see a pattern of control, of isolation, of narrative manipulation. If this whistleblower's evidence holds, it paints a devastating picture that Meghan may have determined who Harry could and could not speak to during the most vulnerable moment of his family's recent history. To this day, neither Harry nor Meghan has publicly addressed any of these allegations. But palace insiders, aware of the leak's existence, have reportedly begun quiet inquiries. Internal IT teams have been instructed to comb through old logs. External communication firms have been brought in for security audits. And somewhere within Windsor, someone is asking the question no one wants to hear out loud. What if Harry wasn't the one who walked away? To understand the magnitude of what the leaked notes and whistleblower accounts suggest, one must examine Meghan Markle's role, not only in Harry's public transformation, but in the subtle and powerful shaping of his private choices. This isn't a story about blame. It's a story about influence, access, and what happens when personal ambition collides with centuries of rigid tradition. The truth that emerges from the shadows of that funeral is not just about what Harry couldn't do, it's about what Meghan didn't allow. When Meghan Markle entered the royal family, she did so with the world watching. A biracial American actress marrying a British prince was hailed as a modern fairy tale. But it was clear, almost from the beginning, that Meghan had no intention of simply playing the traditional royal role. She was outspoken, independent, media-savvy, and used to writing her own script. That quality, while celebrated in celebrity culture, clashed violently with the palace's decades-old system of silence, duty, and institutional control. Behind closed doors, aides whispered about her unwillingness to learn the rules. Stories began surfacing of staff members quitting or claiming they were bullied. The firm's machinery wasn't built for individuals who questioned the chain of command. Meghan, according to those close to the situation, didn't just question it, she challenged it. And while she challenged the monarchy from the inside, she also drew Harry further out of it. By the time of Prince Philip's death, Meghan and Harry had already been settled in California for over a year. They had signed massive media deals, hired an elite team of Hollywood strategists, and publicly cast the royal family as out of touch at best, racist and abusive at worst. The Oprah interview had just exploded across international headlines, and tensions were at a boiling point. Meghan, then pregnant with Lilibet, announced she would not be attending the funeral due to her condition and medical advice. To most, this seemed reasonable. A transatlantic flight in the third trimester during a pandemic was a risk few would take. But sources close to the Sussex household began to suggest that her decision was more strategic than medical. One former aide, now working in the private sector, said Meghan didn't want to be seen apologizing or reconciling. Not when they'd just taken the gloves off in front of Oprah. Being seen with the royals would have muddied the message. And Meghan doesn't do muddled messages. It wasn't just about optics, it was about control. In California, Meghan controlled the narrative. She managed their brand. She orchestrated their media presence down to the smallest detail. From clothing choices to lighting setups and interviews, everything was designed to reinforce a specific identity, a couple liberated from monarchy, stepping into their own power, unburdened by tradition, allowing Harry to re-engage emotionally or logistically with the royal family during a major public event risked undoing that progress. A handshake with Charles, a candid moment with William, even a shared tear, it could all be interpreted as reconciliation. And that wasn't the story Meghan wanted told. Multiple insiders now allege that Meghan exerted tight control over Harry's contact with his family. Not overtly, not through shouting or threats, but through framing, persuasion, and selective access. She's incredibly smart, said one former associate. She understands how media works, how narrative works. And she knows Harry's weaknesses. He wants peace, but he's scared of being hurt again. Meghan tapped into that fear and positioned herself as the only one who could protect him. The leaked drafts of Harry's unsent notes suggest internal conflict. One note reads, "I want to talk to Pa before Saturday. I don't want to be talked out of it." The phrasing is crucial. Talked out of it. By whom? It doesn't specify, but when paired with digital evidence showing Meghan's login accessing the draft, it implies more than accidental overlap. The security logs further reinforce this possibility. One flagged session shows that a message Harry was composing was paused midway, then saved under a new name. It was never sent. Shortly after, a new calendar entry appeared on the Sussex household planner, an interview preparation session with Meghan's PR strategist. The same evening, Harry's draft was deleted entirely. It's not proof, but it's a pattern. This pattern is consistent with other reports from the period. According to a producer working with one of Harry and Meghan's media ventures, there were frequent discussions around timing, messaging, and avoiding contradictions. Meghan, they said, was particularly adamant about avoiding what she called emotional leakage. If Harry appeared too nostalgic or conflicted about the monarchy, it would undercut the authenticity of their story. That kind of framing affects decision-making. And if Harry, in his grief, felt a pull to reach out to his father or brother, it's entirely plausible that Meghan's response wasn't no, but why would you? Why would you talk to them now, after everything they've done? Why give them a chance to spin this and make you look weak? Why let them back in after they shut the door on us? Even without direct commands, these questions can act as barriers. They create doubt. They shape action. And in Harry's case, they may have been enough to stop him from pushing harder. The irony, of course, is that Meghan has publicly spoken often about family estrangement, about how painful it was for her father, Thomas Markle, to sell private letters to the press. She spoke about betrayal, control, and being silenced. And yet, if the leaks are accurate, she may have done something painfully similar to Harry, intervening in his private communication during a time of grief, denying him the chance to connect with the family he left behind. It's also worth noting that Meghan's absence from the funeral gave her plausible deniability. She wasn't there. She wasn't seen. She could say nothing and let the silence speak for itself. The world focused on Harry, watching for any sign of softness or solidarity. But Meghan remained in California, publicly quiet, privately active. There are additional allegations, unverified but increasingly whispered, about Meghan's communications team making media monitoring requests during the funeral. One document, leaked to a royal journalist, outlines a media tracking request from an LA-based firm, asking for sentiment analysis of British press headlines surrounding Harry's body language. The firm was asked to flag any articles suggesting reconciliation. The order came from a shell company tied to Meghan's commercial representation. This level of message control paints a picture of intent, not malicious, but strategic. Meghan, it appears, viewed the funeral not as a family affair, but as a battlefield for narrative. And in that framework, Harry was the most valuable chess piece. This isn't to say Harry lacked agency. He's an adult, a veteran, a father. But the emotional complexities of grief, guilt, and family division are fertile ground for influence. Meghan, understanding Harry's trauma from his mother's death, had long positioned herself as his emotional sanctuary. He believed she saved him. So when she raised concerns, he listened. When she doubted the motives of his family, he believed her. And when she suggested silence, he obeyed. If she did block or discourage him from contacting his family during the funeral week, it wasn't necessarily to hurt him. It may have been to protect the image they'd worked so hard to build. An image of independence, unity, and truth-telling. But the cost of maintaining that image may have been Harry's last chance to stand beside his family, not. Meghan has not responded to the leaked notes. Her spokesperson declined multiple requests for comment. But behind the scenes, palace aides are said to be furious. One former royal protection officer described the revelations as a betrayal of a different kind, one that doesn't involve headlines or interviews, but quiet acts of separation. Another insider put it more bluntly: she didn't just take Harry away. She kept him away. And Harry, now back in California, may be grappling with a truth he never fully realized. What if his silence at the funeral wasn't his choice? What if the bridge between him and his family was deliberately burned, not by those waiting at the other end, but by the one standing beside him? It began with a single draft, a message never sent, a private confession captured in writing, meant only for his father's eyes. That document, according to the whistleblower and verified by digital forensics, marked the beginning of a series of intimate and increasingly urgent notes from Prince Harry to King Charles, then Prince Charles, written in the narrow, emotionally raw window between Prince Philip's death and the funeral service at Windsor. The notes, saved on a shared Sussex household device and never transmitted, offer a rare and heartbreaking insight into Harry's state of mind during what should have been a moment of shared mourning. They also present what may be the most direct proof yet that he tried, desperately, to reconnect with his family in the days leading up to the funeral, only to be silenced by forces outside of his control. The first note is short, less than a paragraph, and reads more like a whisper than a plea. Dated April 10, 2021, the day after Philip's death, it was saved as draft_1.ph. It reads, "I don't know what I'm supposed to say. I'm angry and I'm sad, but mostly I feel like I've already lost more than just Grandpa. I've lost all of you. But I want to fix that. Even for a moment. Can we talk?" There is no punctuation after the final question. The line just ends, hanging open, as if unfinished. And maybe it was. The version recovered from the device suggests it was written and edited multiple times over a period of 20 minutes, with Harry returning to it repeatedly before abandoning it altogether. The second note, draft_2_final, shows a significant shift in tone. It's more structured, more deliberate. This one is directed specifically to Charles, and it runs nearly a full page. The language is tender but cautious. Harry acknowledges the rift. He references the Oprah interview, not by name, but by calling it the storm that followed us into silence. He writes, "I know I broke protocol. I know we said things the family didn't want said, but none of it was meant to hurt you. I wasn't trying to burn bridges. I was trying to build my own. That doesn't mean I don't want to cross yours again." He then shifts into direct appeal. "If there's even a small window before the service, I'd like to talk. No aides, no agenda, just you and me. Even if it's just a few minutes. I'll wait as long as it takes." But again, the note was never sent. Forensic data suggests that this draft remained open on the device for nearly 2 hours. Then it was closed, overwritten, and eventually deleted. The third note, recovered from a backup cache and labeled unsent_message_final_draft, is dated April 14th, the same day the palace publicly confirmed Harry had returned to the UK. This one is darker. The tone is more fragmented, bordering on desperate. It's not a plea for a meeting. It's a confession of emotional confusion. At one point, Harry writes, "I walked through the gate today and felt like I didn't belong. The only time that's ever happened here was when I came back from Afghanistan and no one knew how to speak to me. Now, it's worse. Now, it feels like I'm the stranger who lit the house on fire and came back to watch it burn." He goes on to ask, "Is it too late? Have I really crossed the point where I can't even grieve with my family?" And finally, "If you don't want to see me, I'll understand. But I needed you to know, I'm here. Even if it's just to stand in the back and say goodbye quietly." This message is significant not only for its emotional weight, but for the forensic trail it left behind. Logs show the message was edited from 2 different login sessions. One of them is believed to be Harry's personal account. The other, as previously reported, is linked to Meghan's admin credentials. The final version of the message, according to data logs, was saved and then deleted from the local drive just before Harry's second day in quarantine. Security logs from Frogmore Cottage confirm that he remained indoors that day, but device access logs indicate remote login activity within the household network, again raising questions about whether Meghan reviewed or removed the message. The fourth note was perhaps the most haunting. It was saved under a nondescript file name, April_letter_text.docs, and appears to have been drafted as a potential handwritten message. It's unclear whether this version was ever printed or written out by hand, but the contents reveal a man grappling not only with loss, but with a deep sense of powerlessness. I keep thinking about when we used to laugh at Grandpa's terrible jokes. The way he'd mutter under his breath and think no one heard. The way he'd act irritated when we got emotional, but secretly loved it. He wasn't perfect. None of us are. But he held everything together by pretending it didn't need to be held. Now he's gone, and I don't know what to hold on to. The note continues. "I know Mom would have told me to go anyway, to knock on the door and sit down no matter how awkward it was. But I'm not sure I have that in me anymore. I don't know how to fight my way back in. And maybe you're not ready to let me." And it ends with, "I love you. Despite everything, I love you, and I miss who we used to be." This note, according to the whistleblower, was saved multiple times over a 2-day period. Each version showed small edits. The removal of phrases like "please forgive me" and "I want to come home." The softening of words. The quiet erasure of vulnerability. By the time of the funeral, there were no more drafts. Nothing further was written after April 16th. It's unknown whether Harry gave up or whether the environment around him made further efforts feel futile. What is clear from these notes is that he was, at the very least, emotionally available. He was present. He was trying. And he was blocked. If not by someone else's hand, then by a complex, layered set of fears and obligations that made pressing sin feel impossible. These messages tell a story that no press statement ever could. A story of a son reaching for his father, not with pride, not with politics, but with open grief. They reveal a man trapped between two identities, the prince he used to be and the man his life in California had forced him to become. It's also important to recognize what these notes don't say. Nowhere in the drafts is there bitterness. Nowhere does Harry lash out. He doesn't accuse. He doesn't blame. Even when he writes about being frozen out, he does so with restraint. His words are not strategic, they're emotional. They are raw, scattered, deeply human. This emotional clarity is perhaps the most damning evidence against the public narrative that Harry was detached or disinterested during the funeral. He wasn't. He was overwhelmed, conflicted, and if these notes are to be believed, silently begging for one last chance to stand beside his family. For a family built on public stoicism, these messages are jarringly intimate. They shatter the myth that Harry was unfeeling or opportunistic. They recast him as the tragic figure in a much larger, more brutal drama, one where his voice, for all its global reach, was silenced in the moments that mattered most. And now, with these notes leaked and confirmed, the damage stretches far beyond personal heartbreak. These words, though never meant for public eyes, have the power to permanently alter how the world views not only Harry, but his role in the royal family's unraveling. If the royal family ever doubted his sincerity, they don't have that excuse anymore. If the public ever questioned his intentions, they now have his truth in black and white. What remains is the question of whether these unsent messages will serve as the spark for long overdue healing, or simply another brick in the ever-growing wall between a prince and the family he once called home. In the wake of Prince Philip's death, King Charles was no longer just a grieving son. He was the de facto patriarch of a royal family quietly collapsing under the weight of internal fractures. As he stood before the world on the day of his father's funeral, dressed in mourning black with shoulders slightly stooped and expression unreadable, Charles carried not only the memory of the man who shaped his public life, but the burden of a son who had, in the eyes of the nation, betrayed the family. And yet, behind the measured calm and restrained grief, a much deeper conflict was unfolding. Because, according to sources close to the king's inner circle, Charles never knew about the notes. The revelation that Prince Harry had tried, again and again, to reach out in the days before the funeral reportedly struck Charles like a thunderbolt. These weren't emotional outbursts made in the press or self-serving gestures. They were personal. They were private. They were invisible. And for over 2 years, he believed they never existed. To understand the gravity of this, one must understand how Charles grieves. He is not a man prone to emotional displays. Those who have worked with him say he internalizes, processes slowly. He does not shout, nor does he easily forgive. For Charles, order is healing. Disruption, especially from within the family, is destabilizing. It was this belief in duty and decorum that led him to absorb the shock of Harry and Meghan's Oprah interview without public response. Not because he didn't feel it, but because to acknowledge it emotionally would mean admitting the monarchy had splintered under his watch. And so, when Harry returned for the funeral, Charles was prepared for distance. His aides, according to now-leaked planning notes, advised him to keep interactions with Harry minimal. Stick to protocol. Let the cameras see dignity, not dysfunction, one note allegedly advised. Charles agreed. After all, from his perspective, Harry had fled the kingdom, gone on international television to question the family's integrity, and made little to no effort to repair the damage. At least, that's what he believed. In private, Charles reportedly expressed sorrow, not fury, about Harry's estrangement. One aide recalled him saying, "I raised him to know better than this." But the pain was clear. Charles saw Harry as the son he had tried hardest to protect, the one he bent the rules for, allowed the most freedom, the one he quietly shielded from the worst palace politics. Watching that son walk away, and then fire missiles back at the institution from across the Atlantic, left him more wounded than angry. So when Harry walked into Windsor for the funeral, Charles was guarded. There would be no spontaneous embraces. No side conversations, only what the moment demanded. And when Harry made no visible effort to bridge the distance, Charles took it as confirmation. His son had changed. He no longer saw this family as his own. He had turned his back on tradition, and this time, perhaps even on grief. But it was all a misunderstanding. A silent tragedy playing out in parallel tracks, father and son walking through the same pain, completely unaware of the other's efforts to connect. In one of Harry's leaked messages, dated the day before the funeral, he wrote, "I understand if you're not ready, but I don't want to leave this country without having tried. I'll be waiting. If it's 5 minutes, I'll take it." Charles never saw those words. According to the whistleblower's timeline, by the time the message was finalized, it had already been removed from the digital queue, either intercepted or deleted on the sending end. Charles, who had agreed to receive no direct messages from Harry without clearance, trusted his aides to filter what was relevant. That clearance, it turns out, was a barrier never meant to exist. One senior courtier, speaking anonymously, described the aftermath of discovering the notes. It was like watching him process the funeral all over again. Not as the heir saying goodbye to a father, but as a father realizing he missed a moment with his own son. He didn't cry. He just sat still. For a long time. This silence isn't just about miscommunication. It's about the culture that surrounds the monarchy, a culture where emotion is often treated as weakness, and vulnerability is smothered beneath schedules, titles, and obligations. Charles, raised in an era when royal children were left in nurseries while their parents traveled for months at a time, did not grow up with models of emotional intimacy. His letters to his own father, Prince Philip, were famously formal. His relationship with Queen Elizabeth was respectful, but distant. So when Harry reached for something softer, something real, it came at odds with the very framework Charles was born to preserve. The pain deepened when palace staff discovered that Charles had written a note of his own before the funeral. A short message intended for Harry, asking if he'd be willing to walk with him for a few minutes in the private gardens after the service. But the message was never delivered. One aide claimed that the environment was too tense and that everyone was walking on eggshells. The note remained in a desk drawer at Clarence House, never handed over. 2 messages. 2 men. Each reaching out, each never seeing the other's hand. The king's emotional detachment during the funeral, in hindsight, was not apathy, it was self-preservation. Believing Harry had abandoned the family, Charles retreated into the safety of formality. He gave speeches. He shook hands. He carried the casket of the man who raised him. But the real loss came hours later, in the quiet spaces between obligations, when he returned to his study alone and found the silence deafening. Some close to him believe he is now haunted by that silence. Had he known, one insider said, he would have spoken to Harry. Not for the cameras, not for the press, but because that's what his father would have wanted. Philip always said, "Don't let the small things rot the whole house." He would have wanted Charles to fix it. And now, it may be too late. The notes exist, but the moment has passed. Harry is back in California. Charles is king. The machinery of state has taken over. Coronation ceremonies, foreign policy meetings, constitutional obligations, they fill his schedule. But behind the crown, he remains a father with unfinished business. One who believed his son had left him. One who now knows his son tried to come back. The internal conversations around this revelation have reportedly become a point of tension inside the palace. Some aides have urged Charles to confront the issue directly, perhaps even reach out. Others caution that reopening wounds now could risk more damage, especially with Meghan's continued silence and the growing public attention around the leak. One thing is certain, King Charles is not the kind of man who acts impulsively. He does not rush into emotional scenes. But according to one former communications staffer, there are signs that the discovery of Harry's notes has shifted something fundamental in the king's thinking. He's reevaluating everything, the staffer said. His entire understanding of Harry's actions was built on the belief that Harry didn't care. Now that belief is broken. And when you realize you've misunderstood your own child, that doesn't leave you. It stays with you. It reshapes you. If there is a path to reconciliation, it may begin not with grand public gestures, but with something as small and as brave as finally reading the messages that were meant to be read all along. On the day of Prince Philip's funeral, all eyes were not just on the coffin, the Queen, or even the newly widowed monarch-in-waiting. They were on 2 brothers, born into royalty, raised in privilege, and once inseparable companions in grief. Prince William and Prince Harry had walked behind their mother's coffin as children. They had once shared the burden of being the face of the monarchy's future. But on that solemn April day in Windsor, The distance between them wasn't measured in steps. It was in silence. The procession behind Prince Philip's coffin was arranged with deliberate symmetry. But symmetry, as it turned out, was just theater. While the brothers stood close enough to touch, they might as well have been continents apart. The coldness wasn't just visible, it was structural. And when the world noticed the gap between them, many assumed it was merely the aftermath of Meghan and Harry's controversial media presence. But now, in light of Prince Harry's unsent notes and the palace staffer's testimony, that interpretation feels far too simplistic. According to those close to William, the older brother had already made a private decision in the weeks before the funeral. There would be no softening. There would be no moment of reconciliation, no backdoor handshakes, no signal to the cameras that all was well. William, still burning from what he saw as a public betrayal by Harry and Meghan, was in no mood to entertain olive branches. In fact, insiders say he refused to even read briefings that included Harry's name during the planning of the funeral. A senior aide described it this way: William wasn't just hurt. He felt undermined. He felt humiliated. The Oprah interview had damaged the institution, but more personally, it had painted him, Harry's brother, as cold, complicit, even racist by implication. That was unforgivable. And so, when Harry arrived in the UK and made internal inquiries about a possible meeting, the door was shut firmly. William would not engage before the funeral, and if there was to be any conversation, it would be under the strict condition that it would not be reported, observed, or assumed as reconciliation. This choice was devastating for Harry, according to the contents of one particularly emotional note recovered from the leaked files. Dated April 15th, it reads, "I've tried William. I've left messages. I've asked through people we both trust. I know he doesn't want to see me. But if he thinks I don't care, he's wrong. I miss my brother. I miss laughing without thinking about cameras. I miss him knowing what I'm thinking without having to explain. I miss not being hated." These words, never delivered, capture the emotional weight Harry was carrying that day. And when he finally came face to face with William, the pain became palpable. During the procession, the two walked separated by their cousin, Peter Phillips. Royal protocol? Perhaps. But many believe this was a direct request from William himself. The image of the two walking together would have created a false perception of harmony. William would not allow that. Not after what he saw as Harry's betrayal. Body language experts at the time noted the stiffness in William's stride, the tightness of his jaw. His eyes never drifted toward his brother. Not once. And after the service, when the cameras briefly caught the three, Harry, William, and Kate, walking together, it was Kate who seemed to do all the work. She spoke gently, broke the ice. William gave nothing. He stared ahead, kept his hands locked, and barely acknowledged Harry's presence. It was, by all accounts, not a snub, but a confirmation. The relationship was over. But William's reaction, while cold, was not purely emotional. He viewed the situation as a matter of principle. From his perspective, Harry and Meghan had thrown the family under the bus during one of the most delicate transitions in modern royal history. The Oprah interview had aired while Prince Philip was in hospital. Accusations of institutional racism, mental health neglect, and family dysfunction were now global headlines. William, who had spent his entire life being groomed to lead the monarchy into a more modern, inclusive future, saw the interview as not only an attack on the institution, but on his personal character. One palace source said, "William has always carried the weight of legacy more heavily than Harry. He knew what it meant to one day be king. So for him, public loyalty is everything." And Harry broke that contract. Harry, on the other hand, saw things differently. According to the unsent notes, he didn't believe he had betrayed anyone. He believed he had finally told the truth. He felt silence for years, isolated, dismissed. The interview, to him, was an emotional release. But he never expected the damage would be irreparable. In another draft message labeled, Will_letter_draft, Harry writes, "I didn't go on TV to hurt you. I went to tell my story because no one inside the family would listen. I didn't think it would push us this far apart. And now, standing here, I don't know if you'd even believe me if I said that." This heartbreak plays out not just in writing, but in the imagery of the day. When the family emerged from the chapel after the service, there was a moment, a sliver of time, when Harry turned toward William as if about to speak. William continued walking. He didn't flinch. The moment passed. It is believed that Harry hoped that being present for the funeral, without cameras, without his wife, without an agenda, might be enough to thaw the ice. But William had drawn a boundary, and he would not budge. After the funeral, when the family gathered privately, the brothers reportedly remained distant. They were in the same room, but never alone together. At one point, a senior family member tried to engineer a quiet meeting between them in a hallway, but William declined. "Not here. Not now. Not until he's ready to own what he's done," he reportedly said. What William may not have known is that Harry was ready, but he was also blocked. According to data logs, Harry made at least one additional attempt to send a message through a secure communications channel used by senior royals. The message never arrived. Deleted or lost, we may never know. What we do know is that the message's final version included this line: "You're my brother." That used to mean everything. I don't know who we are anymore, but I want to find a way back. As far as